Good morning, everybody. Thank you all so much for being here. Welcome to the shadow hearing called Kidnapped and Disappeared: Trump's Detention Abuses. A few quick housekeeping items. This is a shadow hearing, not a formal hearing, but we're going to run it essentially the same way as we normally do with hearings, with opening statements from our witnesses and questions from our members. There is a timer here for members to keep track. We're doing 4 minutes because they've moved votes a little bit earlier. We want to make sure we get everybody in. For our witnesses, you have 5 minutes, and you have a timer right there. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. I'd like to welcome our witnesses, the members of the Judiciary Committee, as well as members from the wider Democratic Caucus. This is our 5th shadow hearing in a series of hearings that I've been hosting on how the Trump administration is destroying our immigration system and trampling on our constitutional rights. Today's hearing will focus on the administration's actions to supercharge immigration incarceration to record levels. Trump campaigned on deporting the, quote, worst of the worst, but that is absolutely not what he's been doing. Instead, he has cruelly ripped apart families, detained people of every immigration status, including U.S. citizens, and allowed rogue ICE and Border Patrol agents to terrorize communities across our country. Let me be very clear, for those who are watching, that immigration is a civil matter, not a criminal one, with immigration law being the most complex in the country after tax law. That means that immigrants are not automatically provided with government attorneys, and the majority go through the system completely unrepresented by attorneys, despite the tremendous complexities of the legal immigration system, unless they are able to afford an attorney themselves or they're able to get a pro bono attorney. ICE's own website still says that detention is civil, not criminal in nature, and that detention is not supposed to be punitive, as this is an administrative proceeding. However, the story of what is happening today is completely different. Today, according to ICE's own statistics, 73% of people held in ICE detention have absolutely no criminal conviction, and the vast majority of the remaining 27% have minor convictions such as traffic violations. ICE has been arresting people at courthouses when they're trying to follow the legal process. They're profiling immigrants around the country, picking up people for the language they speak or the street corner that they hang out on. Video footage almost every day captures horrific violence of masked DHS kidnapping and capturing of people, including at least 170 documented instances of U.S. citizens being detained. According to a recent report by Politico, more than 220 judges have ruled against Trump's mass detention policies, saying that these detentions violate due process. That includes 23 judges who were appointed by Donald Trump himself. Meanwhile, Trump's focus on arresting immigrants has made us all less safe. A quarter of FBI agents, half of DEA agents, 2/3 of ATF agents, and 90% of Homeland Security investigations have been detailed to ICE's immigration enforcement arm. As a result, investigators are spending 33% fewer hours on child exploitation cases, on weapons seizures, which fell by 73%, and narcotics arrests fell by 11%. So immigration detention centers are full of mothers and fathers and beloved community members, while those who do pose any threat are free. You have to ask then, who is benefiting? Just last month, the 2 largest private immigration prison companies, GEO and CoreCivic, reported huge quarterly profits and told investors that they represented, quote, an attractive opportunity for investors, thanks to the massive increases in government funding. These very same prison companies donated millions of dollars to help get Trump elected, and now they're reaping the benefits. While the average daily population in immigration detention was fewer than 34,000 people in 2015, it is now over 65,000 people. And with the passage of Trump's big bad betrayal bill, which pumped an unprecedented $45 billion into ICE, it is estimated that detention will ramp up to over 107,000 beds by the end of the year. Hard-earned taxpayer dollars going to terrorize immigrants and pad the profits of private prison companies. What could be wrong with this picture? Amidst this surge in detention, conditions have gone from bad to worse, with terrible overcrowding, unsanitary conditions, long waits to get medical help if received at all, and inedible food, described by some as, quote, dripping with blood. Multiple pregnant women have been shackled and even suffered miscarriages due to their mistreatment in detention. And since Trump took office, in just 10 months, there have been 23 in-custody deaths, a shocking number, and more than any year since 2005. Meanwhile, Trump has decimated any oversight mechanisms, including essentially dismantling all the offices that previously performed key functions of oversight for DHS, blocking members of Congress from doing our job and conducting unannounced inspections of ICE facilities, even arresting a member of Congress for trying to do her job. Over and over again, we have heard heartbreaking and horrific stories of dehumanization, and it's by design, to break people's spirit, to force them into submission, to force them into accepting deportation. It is outrageous, and it cannot continue. Yesterday, I reintroduced my Dignity for Detained Immigrants Act with an unprecedented 124 original co-sponsors. The bill would reduce our over-reliance on detention and allow us to use proven methods of alternatives to detention that cost far less and are humane and effective. It would end the use of detention for profit, end inhumane conditions at detention centers, and protect the civil and human rights of immigrants. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today. It is so important to hear your stories, and you are shedding a light on the abuses of our immigrant incarceration system and helping us to move towards humane and effective solutions. It's now my pleasure to introduce today's witnesses. Sarah Owings is a partner at Owings McNollan LLC in Atlanta, Georgia. She's practiced immigration law since earning her Juris Doctor from Georgia State University College of Law in 2007. Sarah served as an elected director on the Board of Governors for the American Immigration Lawyers Association from 2017 to 2023. Her legal experience covers a wide range of immigration matters, including family-based petitions, humanitarian relief, and asylum cases. However, her focus is on removal defense, especially representing foreign nationals detained by ICE. Mildred Pierre is the co-founder of Community Spark Solutions, a health equity firm dedicated to expanding access to free health services for underserved families in rural counties. A first-generation American born to Haitian immigrants, Mrs. Pierre is the wife of Rodney Taylor, a Liberian-born, disabled, undocumented immigrant currently detained at the Stewart Detention Center in rural Lumpkin, Georgia, since January of 2025. Together, they're raising a family of 7 children. Laura St. John is the legal director at the Florence Immigrant and Refugee Rights Project, the only organization in Arizona that provides free legal and social services to people in immigrant detention. In this role, she works closely with other leadership team members to oversee provision of legal and social services, as well as directly overseeing the organization's broader advocacy efforts, holding the government accountable for abuses, ensuring the humane treatment of immigrants, and protecting due process and access to counsel. Kate Voigt is Senior Policy Counsel at the American Civil Liberties Union. Prior to joining the ACLU, she was Senior Policy Advisor at the Department of Homeland Security Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, and while at CRCL, she investigated complaints filed by the public alleging DHS civil rights and civil liberties abuses, including complaints related to detention standards and conditions and language and legal access. Ms. Voigt earned her BA from Colorado College and her JD from Boston College Law School. We welcome all of you and thank you for participating and ask that you summarize your testimony in 4 minutes. To help you stay within that time, there's a timer to help you keep track. Ms. Owings, you're recognized.
Thank you and good morning to everyone. Thank you, Member Jayapal, for arranging this. It's got a green light. Is that on? Are we on? Okay. Closer? Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay. So good morning and thank you everyone for being here. I've been an immigration attorney in Atlanta, Georgia for 18 years, but my practice extends to other facilities, so I've represented people throughout the South in immigration detention centers. And I'm here to tell you that the detain everyone policy that is pushed by the Trump administration has exacerbated a range of already serious problems within the immigration detention system. Simply put, when you stuff extra people into a cage that is already full, it gets even more crowded. I have individuals, including a client of mine who was forced to spend almost 4 nights sleeping on the floor of a small cell in downtown Atlanta with 16 other people with his head basically next to the toilet. He wasn't even able to contact me for those days to let me know where he was located. Overcrowding worsens these already difficult detention conditions because we have these remote facilities that lack sufficient medical staff and equipment to address complex health needs for people who have chronic conditions and are being denied release in nearly all circumstances. Yesterday, the media reported on the case of Williams Toro Enamorado, a young man who was detained by ICE during Operation Charlotte's Web in North Carolina on his way to receive dialysis treatment. He requires dialysis treatment because he is in end-stage renal failure due to a prior detention he had in ICE custody when a minor kidney problem went neglected and became a major one. ICE knew where he was because he was in the process of applying for a green card. He had all the preliminary steps completed and was simply awaiting the final adjudication of his petition when they elected to redetain him and told him the best way for him to get care would be to go to Honduras immediately and get his next round of hemodialysis there. It was only through quick action over the Thanksgiving holiday that his counsel was able to stop that in order for him to get treatment and the ability to continue his case in the United States. There's been many cases like this. It's also terrible for primary caregivers. We have numbers of examples of that, but what comes to mind for me is a family that I represent who are elderly, an elderly U.S. citizen woman of retirement age and her 72-year-old husband who was detained at their visa interview. She's also on dialysis, and he was responsible for taking her and providing all family care while she was recovering from those treatments. So she has no one in the home now to help her walk up the stairs even, which she is not quite able to do due to her condition. These are, someone who has no criminal record, someone who is not a threat to society at all and who is deeply needed at home. And yet ICE made this decision and will not release. We see this throughout many different formats. They also will use the transfer system frequently in order to try to move people around for not any real discernible reason. I was called by a panicked colleague the other day telling me that someone who had a heart valve failure, instead of being released for the repair that they needed, was in fact transferred 3 times prior to being released. And the text message I received simply said, ICE are about to kill this man. It's a constant problem. We're seeing many cases, and despite the evident harm, ICE continues. And they continue because it's big business. And we would like to talk more about that, but I will yield back my time. I will also note the timer did not document my time, so I apologize.
Oh, it's right there.
Okay, perfect, great, thank you.
And you were perfectly on time, Ms. Owings.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much. Ms. Pierre, thank you so much for being with us. You're recognized.
Thank you. I'm pretty short, so let's get this microphone in check. Hi, thank you, Ranking Member Jayapal, and all the distinguished members of Congress for holding this hearing. My name is Mildred Pierre. Today I sit before you as the voice for my husband, Rodney Taylor, a vulnerable person who is currently, as Ranking Member Jayapal call it, the Immigrant Detention Industrial Complex at Stewart Detention Center. He cannot be here to speak for himself, so here I am. Rodney was born in Liberia in 1978 with severe disabilities, 1 club foot, one kneecap or tibia on one leg, no foot on the other, and only a thumb on his right hand. Because disabled children in Liberia were often harmed or even killed because of taboo and witchcraft and their ideas of witchcraft, his mother hid him for 2 years. He crawled on his belly until the age of 2 when Shriners Children's Hospital brought him to the United States for a series of surgeries that changed his life. At age 3 years old, Rodney walked for the first time on prosthetics. By 10, both legs had been amputated. and he underwent surgeries so he could hold objects with his right hand. In spite of everything he endured, he grew up in an extraordinary man. He became a professional barber known as Spock the Barber, a taxpayer, a father of 7, a pillar of his community. He cuts hair for free at back-to-school drives, church events, and fundraise for breast cancer walks, known everywhere for his huge, contagious Eddie Murphy laugh. Today, at 47 years old, that man is deteriorating in detention. He has been held at Stewart since January, taken in front of our children just 11 days before our engagement. Conditions he faces are inhumane. For the first 3 days, Rodney could not walk because ICE refused to allow the charger for his prosthetics legs into the facility. Without power, those legs become 20-pound rigid weights. Only on day 4, after hours of me pleading, they allowed him to have his charger. Rodney has had over 14 different cellmates and has never been given a single cell for his safety. Prosthetics should be worn no more than 8 hours a day. However, Rodney must wear his 23 hours a day, even while sleeping, because he fears it will be stolen or broken. Without protective creams and needs, he developed boils. He developed bruises, pain and chafing in those amputation sites. No dignity for disabled detained immigrants like Rodney. He has lost nearly 20 pounds, making his prosthetics fit improperly and increasing his pain. Because guards often refuse to let others bring food to him, he frequently misses meals. He has diverticulitis and requires a strict diet. Yet the food he receives is repetitive, poor quality, and often inedible. He went almost 2 weeks without a shower because the facility would not provide a safe place for him to remove his prosthetics. When he finally received a shower stool, the shower area was covered in mold, feces, urine, human bodily fluids. Rodney had to crawl on his hand and his limbs through those conditions just to take a shower. Again, no dignity for detained immigrants like Rodney. When he requests medical care, it takes 2 weeks just to get a response. His blood pressure has reached 181 over 112. Rodney has a family history of heart disease. His father died of a massive heart attack at a very young age. He entered detention on 1 blood pressure medication. He is now on 2. In May, he fell and severely injured his only functional hand. Screws from his prosthetics legs scattered. Other detainees felt bad. They carried him to medical, which is the clinic. The staff didn't know what to do. They kept him there for 12 hours. They gave him tape and a wheelchair, but he cannot use a wheelchair because of his thumb. The fall happened because ICE failed to provide new prosthetics, which his doctor had allowed to be available since January 31st. Rodney now suffers constant back pain, hip, and chest pain. He has been diagnosed with now bone spurs, something that he did not have before detention. It took 5 months for him to receive help for his prosthetics and 7 months just to get an injection on his right hand. Again, no civil and human rights for Rodney. And Rodney spoke to a reporter about the human rights violations, the broken air conditioning for 3 months in the summer, water leaking from the ceiling and like rain. The facility denied everything. And when he raised issues with the chief inside Stewart Detention Center, she retaliated by sending him to solitary confinement for about 3 days. No water, no shower, just the sound of men screaming and crying. A disciplinary panel hearing for this incident never occurred because ICE would have had to admit on record that, in fact, there was no working air conditioning and water leaking from the ceiling. Members of Congress, if Rodney is treated this brutally in the U.S. detention centers, how can he survive deportation? People with disabilities, people like Rodney, he's part of that vulnerable population. In our country with no medical infrastructure, for someone with advanced prosthetics and Liberia children and people with disabilities are at risk of violence, how can a man with no legs, a fragile hand, and chronic conditions in his complex prosthetics needs survive in a country where it rains about 6 months a year and there are dirt roads? The Trump administration is putting profits over human lives. Removal is not just dangerous for Rodney, it's a death sentence. I stand before you today as the woman he loves, the mother of our children, and his advocate, number one advocate. Some days I feel like a widow, even though Rodney, my husband, is still alive. I ask you again, members of Congress, to intervene dignity for detained immigrants to ensure Rodney is released, given medical care and protected from further harm, and allowed dignity and a chance to live. Thank you so much.
So powerful, Ms. Pierre. I'm so sorry that your family is experiencing this. Thank you for being here to share it with us. Ms. St. John, you're recognized.
All right, can you hear me all right? Closer? Okay. Okay. Good morning, and thank you to members of Congress for your interest in learning more about ICE detention. My name is Laura St. John. I'm legal director at the Florence Immigrant and Refugee Rights Project. For over 35 years, the Florence Project has provided free legal and social services to adults and children in Arizona who are facing removal in detention. This includes under the Legal Orientation Program, which was terminated earlier this year. Under the current administration, worsening detention conditions combined with unprecedented and aggressive policies on bond and third country removals work together to purposefully deter people from exercising their legal rights under U.S. law. Conditions in prison-like immigration detention facilities have long been deeply problematic, as we have just heard. Recently, however, conditions have worsened, and what oversight existed has been functionally eliminated. Our clients routinely complain about medical neglect, including gaps in critical medication and significant delays or outright denials of any specialized care. They also complain of poor nutrition, including refusal to provide medically necessary diet accommodations, again, much like what is happening in Georgia to Mr. Taylor. Clients with serious mental illness are routinely placed in segregated housing where the isolation often exacerbates their conditions. There's also been a troubling increase in Arizona of allegations of verbal and physical abuse by guards. In one of our facilities, there's a disturbing new policy that now mandates deeply invasive strip searches both before and after every single family visit. The trauma of these invasive searches is such that for some people, they've asked their families to stop visiting entirely. And in what has already been the deadliest year on record for ICE, our clients are increasingly sharing that they fear dying inside the detention centers. Unfortunately, an abrupt change of law around bond eligibility has effectively eliminated most people's option for release from custody. And this remains true despite numerous federal courts having held that the agency's interpretation is contrary to law. Thousands of people now face months, if not years, if they choose to fight their case in detention without any individualized review by a judge to determine whether their detention is fair, just, or even necessary. Meanwhile, the U.S. government is also taking an unprecedented and extremely aggressive approach to third country removals. That's the policy or practice of deporting people to countries where they have no ties whatsoever. You're likely familiar with the harrowing story of Kilmar Albrego Garcia, who ISIS tried to remove to at least 12 countries aside from his own country of origin. What you may not know is that Mr. Albrego Garcia's experience is in many ways becoming commonplace. Hundreds, if not thousands, of people are currently facing potential deportation with no notice and no opportunity to respond to countries that they've never been to. Many of those facing third country removals have actually won protection from removal to their country of origin, but they remain detained by ICE while ICE tries country after country after country in a Kafkaesque cycle. We have seen people unjustly detained in Arizona for months, coming up on almost a whole year at this point, while the administration makes repeated attempts to remove them to various third countries. We have one client, a woman that we work with, who's been detained for 11 months since she was ordered deported. The U.S. government has tried to deport her to 7 different countries, and despite her full cooperation and consent, she has yet to be either removed or released. We have another client who was granted withholding of removal earlier this summer. Now, 6 months later, he is still detained while the government claims to be working on a third country removal. Yet ICE will not tell us what countries are even being considered. This all creates hopelessness by design. This administration's approach is purposeful cruelty as deterrence. If you take anything away from my remarks today, I hope it's that you understand that the ICE detention machine, which costs billions of taxpayer dollars every year, is inflicting very real damage and trauma that not only deeply harms the people who are detained, but has ripple effects for all of American society and our institutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. St. John. One of our first shadow hearings was on third country removals. Encourage members to go back and look at that hearing if you weren't here. Ms. Voigt, thank you. You're recognized.
Thank you, Ranking Member Jayapal, and thank you to each member of the committee for inviting me here today to testify on this important topic. My name is Kate Voigt, and I'm an attorney with over 20 years of experience in immigration law and policy. In March 2023, I was hired as a policy advisor at the Department of Homeland Security's Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, also known as CRCL. In March 2025, the Trump administration subjected me and my colleagues, all of my colleagues, to a RIF, or a reduction in force. Congress created CRCL when it passed the Homeland Security Act of 2002, the same bill that created DHS. It was founded to integrate civil rights and civil liberties into DHS's activities, essentially to ensure that the department's work to enhance national security did not undermine individual liberty, fairness, or equality under the law. CRCL carried out several statutory functions at DHS. One of those functions was to investigate complaints filed by the public stating that DHS had violated someone's civil rights and civil liberties. For example, we investigated complaints regarding disability accommodations, language access, the use of solitary confinement, sexual abuse, and more. While at CRCL, I generally investigated complaints involving violations against people detained at ICE. We frequently and regularly received complaints related to conditions in ICE detention facilities, including complaints that the guards had assaulted someone, that there was no access to legal resources, that the food was rancid, or that there was no privacy when using the bathrooms, for example. Every year, we also conducted approximately a dozen investigations at ICE detention facilities to investigate a group of complaints. These investigations involved traveling to and spending time in detention centers. Being in detention facilities and having eyes on the ground is invaluable to understanding the severity of abuses and ensuring non-citizens can report concerns. CRCL's investigations served an important role at DHS. Most other investigations or inspections into detention facilities were conducted by either a department within ICE itself or a contractor that was responsible to ICE. We were not a part of ICE, but importantly, we were a part of DHS. That allowed us to have access to information that was important and required to fully investigate complaints without being biased or compromised. I want to highlight for you today 3 important impacts of CRCL's investigations. First, we were able to stop problems informally before they worsened. For example, while on-site at a detention facility, we would sit with non-citizens and interview them about the conditions. Someone might tell us that they had not been able to see a doctor for severe pain, or that they were not being given a religious diet. We would raise problems like these directly to ICE, and often they would take steps to remedy them informally and immediately. Second, we issued recommendations aimed at preventing problems from happening again. We looked at what new policies might be needed, what policies might need to be changed, and importantly, what resources ICE needed to be successful. For example, I worked on a large-scale review of language access in detention while at CRCL. As part of that review, I spoke with ICE field office and headquarters personnel. I reviewed individual complaints alleging language access violations. I interviewed people in detention. The result was a report with dozens of recommendations to improve language access in detention. Unfortunately, to my knowledge, that report was never issued following our RIF. Third, based on our investigations, we worked with ICE to update policies, procedures, and trainings to address previously identified gaps. For example, CRCL participated in ICE's internal working groups to develop and revise their national detention standards, as well as policies and trainings involving solitary confinement and sexual abuse prevention, detection, and response. ICE detained over 65,000 people as of November 16th, and it is in the process of growing its resources exponentially. Reports indicate ICE is building new detention facilities that can hold thousands and thousands of people. It has commandeered military planes, land, and personnel to increase the number of people in detention. Without CRCL and other oversight agencies that were also eliminated in March, there is no effective internal oversight mechanism while immigration detention is exploding in scale. In short, I am scared for each and every person in ICE detention. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Ms. Voigt. Now we're going to move to member questions, and I'm going to reserve my questions till the end because we have a wonderful group of members here. So we're going to go in order that people arrived, and we'll start with Mr. Takano. and then Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Ranking Member Jayapal. Ms. Owens, I want to talk to you about the largest single-site operation in Homeland Security investigations history. It was a raid on the Hyundai Meta plant in Georgia in September, which resulted in the detention of approximately 475 workers. Can you discuss the Hyundai plant raid in Georgia and what happened to the people working in the plant?
Yes, thank you, Congressman. I can. I represented 54 of those individuals for their detention process. After they were detained, I was contacted regarding their individual needs, so I do have some knowledge of the situation and can speak to it.
And can you describe this plant? It's not yet open, but tell me about the plant, the physical dimensions.
It's massive. The only thing I can compare it to is probably the U.S. Mall outside. It's about the size of the U.S. Mall. It's a massive facility that's opening up. It's going to bring a lot of jobs to Georgia. I understand 8,100 jobs is the promise from the employers.
So the intention is 8,100 jobs for Americans that live in Georgia. And billions of dollars were invested by Hyundai to build this plant.
That's correct. It's a joint venture between Hyundai and LG, and it is a billion-dollar operation.
And so tell me more about these workers that came from South Korea. And I understand also there was a Japanese national among these workers as well.
Yes, there were a few other nationalities that I dealt with, including, I believe, Indonesia. However, everyone that I worked with, they were all here lawfully. They were all here on visas that were appropriate for the status that they needed to have in relation to what their role was at the facility at the time they were there.
So one gets the impression that ICE thought they really got a tip here. They were going to bust illegal workers here, but in fact, they were all the 475 workers were all here legally. Why were they here? Why were they sent here?
The individuals that I worked with were here because they're highly specialized engineers, people who are skilled at programming the equipment that would be later used by people who don't know how to do this work. It's not skills that we have in manufacturing here domestically, so we have to have people come and set that up and create the patterns that will then be used by domestic workers.
So they were there to stand up the plant as quickly as possible so
Correct.
the plant could get operational so that American workers could work there.
That's exactly right. It was not, they were not building the facility with like hammers and blowtorches. They were there to program the brains of the operation and make sure quality assurance was ready to go when the plant opened.
So let me get this straight. Billions of dollars were invested by a foreign company to build a plant in America so that 8,000 American workers would have jobs. About 475 workers were sent here from with highly skilled capacities to stand up this plant as quickly as possible so we could get these people working. Did these workers return after they were sent out?
So I understand the last I heard about 30 individuals have returned because they simply cannot complete the opening of this facility without the specialized knowledge that these individuals have. So some of them have returned. I understand there is also a lot of fear from South Korean nationals about the idea of coming to work in a place where they may be arrested simply for doing their job and following the law.
So these policies have hurt our ability. These immigration policies the immigration enforcement policies have hurt our ability to attract this sort of investment in our country to produce American jobs. Trump's immigration enforcement is harming Americans. It's harming Americans, legal immigration, and American businesses. President Trump's immigration crackdown makes no distinction for those who are here illegally. The South Koreans spent billions of dollars to invest in the United States, and roughly 8,000 American jobs stood to be made and still stand to be made. We need this expertise in countries like South Korea to bring workers to help train American workers for the skill transfer to help our economy. This is difficult to accomplish when people around the world are scared to come here. Thank you for your testimony and thank you for your work, Ms. Owens. And I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chicano. Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you, Congresswoman Jayapal, for holding this hearing, and thank you so much to the witnesses. All of you brought really important, poignant testimony, and Ms. Pierre, we are thinking about you and Rodney and want to do everything we can. It's unbelievable. And Ms. Voigt, thank you for talking about what used to be when we had civil rights and civil liberties enforcement. But we know right now that under the Trump administration, ICE has become an inhumane, lawless agency. In my home state of Oregon and across the country, we're seeing this extreme overreach, the brutal and aggressive tactics as ICE is hunting, arresting, and then detaining people, some of them U.S. citizens, most of them with no criminal record. Thank you, Representative Jayapal, for pointing out civil versus criminal violations. And many are parents of young children. As you mentioned, Ms. Pierre, your children are now without their father. We've seen ICE continuously escalate these horrific actions throughout the year. And today we're here to talk about the additional abuses that are suffered by people in detention and in detention centers across the country. These abysmal conditions, you really brought them to light with your testimony. The inhumane conditions, they're not giving proper medical care, scarce access to food and water. Ms. Pierre, you really highlighted that. I want to say I read the October 22nd, 2025 letter about the horrific experiences of pregnant detainees. And I must say, as a woman and a mother, I was gut-wrenching and I'm outraged. Nobody should have to suffer that kind of mistreatment and indignity. Any detainee in any condition and under any kind of moral, ethical, medical, or religious principles, this is disgraceful. In many cases, ICE agents coerce detainees to sign voluntary departure forms, sometimes without consent or translation, and sometimes asking detainees to sign the paperwork every day. Sometimes they revoke access to phone calls until detainees sign deportation paperwork, which is blatantly illegal. Sometimes they have them sign it without counsel. ICE's abuses even extend to some detainees who want to sign detention paperwork voluntarily. Actually, I have a constituent in Oregon who wants to go back to Mexico and sign the paperwork, but instead of deporting him, ICE transferred him not once but twice to different detention facilities, first to Texas and then to Louisiana, and held him in solitary confinement. Why is ICE holding him? It's cruel. It makes no sense. He signed the paperwork voluntarily. Maybe this is because the private prison company gets paid for every day he's there. It's really outrageous. So my state of Oregon, we don't have a detention center, so people are sent immediately up to Tacoma, Washington. It's almost at capacity. Detainees are often quickly transferred to other facilities across the country, creating additional hardships for families, lawyers, congressional staff like mine who are trying to assist our constituent. And I want to ask Ms. White, how does moving detainees across the country create barriers to due process?
Yeah, absolutely. When detainees are transferred, it can take a long time for people to even know. I'm talking about family members, I'm talking about attorneys, to even know where their attorney or their client or loved one has been transferred. That can impede legal access when filings need to happen very quickly, which I'm sure is something my co-panelists can talk about as well.
Thank you very much. I also want to mention the bond hearings that was brought up. That's been an issue as well in the Pacific Northwest, and I was able to help a constituent get out of detention because of that conflict between the federal court judge who said you get to post a bond. His paperwork even said, we can't give you a bond hearing, but if we did, it would be this amount. So I hope that gets resolved in favor of letting people get out. I wanted to ask, I know the ACLU was one of the senders of the letter about the pregnant detainees. Have you actually received a response from ICE to that letter?
Not that I'm aware of.
That's not surprising. We frequently do not get responses. And real quickly, I just want to invite all of my colleagues to join me. I recently introduced House Resolution 6349, the Migrant Due Process Protection Act, that will allow people to have their removal hearings held either by telephone or video conference to keep them safe. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Representative Bonamici. Next, I'd like to recognize Representative Ramirez from Illinois.
Thank you, Congresswoman Jayapal. I really appreciate you hosting this shadow hearing and all of the ones that you've done prior. I want to move in to a conversation with you, Ms. Voigt. You mentioned that the Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, which Kristi Noem eliminated in March 2025, investigated civil rights violations and abuses by DHS officials and contractors, including inside immigration detention centers. So, Ms. Voigt, can you confirm there were at least 550 ongoing investigations at the CRCL before this administration gutted the office?
That's my understanding, yes.
Yeah. And Ms. Voigt, do you have a sense of how many of the CRCL investigations are related to detainee abuses or abuses in the detention centers?
I don't have an exact number, but I will say complaints related to detention were a large amount of the complaints we received and a large amount of the complaints we opened.
Yeah. And it's no surprise, we just heard from Ms. Pierre what your husband is experiencing every single day in detention. Ms. Voigt, were any of the investigations regarding contractors related to abuses in detention centers?
I don't have a number, but yes, I think complaints were, contractors are who are operating the facilities across the board. ICE is only sometimes even in the facilities themselves. And so a lot of the complaints we received about conditions were either directly or tangentially related to the contractor's actions.
Thank you for that. And we know since DHS's inception, immigration detention has been dehumanizing. You were talking about some of the recommendations that were made prior to gutting the office itself. Detention facilities have been unsafe, they've been inappropriate and inadequate. Even with Congress's attempt to provide oversight through the establishment of the now dismantled Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties within DHS, these abuses have not just persisted, we know they have now absolutely taken over detention. It's unsafe and inappropriate civil detention system managed by ICE, but as you were just mentioning, in many cases, they're not even in the room, in the building themselves, because they're subcontracting to all of their buddies that they have now contracted to because they gave campaign contributions to our own president. I find it unacceptable to see the levels of death in those institutions, the inadequate inspections and oversight of detention facilities. We can't even get into these detention facilities, and the discrimination based on sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity in the placement of detainees in immigration detention facilities. Look, I want to say this, and I said this yesterday in committee. As a member of Committee on Homeland Security, I'm clear that DHS has to be held accountable for the unconscionable failures we are seeing every single day. They've never demonstrated a commitment to our rights, to due process, to the rule of law, or human dignity. Frankly, for Trump, for Noam, and all of the authoritarians and criminals in this administration, detention seems to be just another means to extract every single bit of profit they can from us and for themselves and their billionaire bosses or campaign donors. We know that more than 62% of immigration detention centers are managed by private prison companies like CoreCivic and GEO Group that donated millions and millions of dollars to Donald Trump's campaign. They knew that mandatory detention paired with Trump's mass deportation campaign would be really good for business, and it has been extremely good for their business. So as I'm wrapping up, I just want to say, as long as they profit, they don't care if we're sick, we're starving, we're dying in detention, and we have to continue to do these shadow hearings every single day and demand the oversight that we have to do. Thank you. With that, I yield back.
Thank you so much, Representative Ramirez. Representative Garcia from Illinois, you're recognized.
Good morning, and thank you to all the witnesses and, of course, the ranking member for leading this hearing on the detention conditions, the inhumane and violation of due process that detainees are enduring across the country. As you know, immigration detention facilities is the infliction of mass institutionalized suffering against hardworking people, most of whom, as has been pointed out, have no criminal records. Broadview is a detention center in the Chicagoland area. It's not supposed to hold people for longer than a few hours, but of course, during Operation Midway Blitz, DHS turned it into a dumping ground for the people they kidnapped off the streets. 4 members of Congress, including my colleague who just spoke, and I sought to visit. We were denied by masked individuals who claimed to be immigration officers. And as community members continued to protest the mistreatment of our neighbors outside the facility, federal agents, of course, used military-style tactics like tear gas and rubber bullets to violently assault them. Fortunately, local organizations filed lawsuits against the DHS over the conditions inside Broadview and the treatment of those outside the facility. Those lawsuits led to court orders that require improvements to the living conditions and an end to the unlawful uses of force against protesters and the press. I was proud, of course, to submit a declaration in support of that lawsuit challenging the conditions at Broadview. Ms. St. John, thank you for being here today. Can you talk about why it is especially problematic to be using processing facilities as detention centers?
Yes, so processing centers, generally speaking, are designed to hold people for no more than a very short period of time, 24 hours, maybe 72 hours. They typically do not have any type of infrastructure for basic hygiene, for sleeping. The lights don't go off. I think many people have heard horror stories for years about the hieleras, the ice boxes that Border Patrol operates along the border, and how those are facilities that are not meant for long-term holding of people. The same problem exists for processing centers. Additionally, there's also the level of issue where a processing center, because it's not designed for long-term housing, is also a location where attorneys have limited to no access to individuals who are there. And the longer people stay there, the longer they're subjected to really coercive tactics to, for instance, forcibly accept a voluntary departure. And this is something that we have seen in Arizona. Part of our project also works at the border, and we have encountered numerous people who have told us that they had time in a processing center where they were asked repeatedly and coerced and said, hey, you need to just take a voluntary departure. You have no chance of fighting your case. You're just going to be detained for months. Why are you doing this? Just go. And people who had very strong legal cases gave up and said, I will just go. And so the issue with these short-term processing centers is the conditions are horrific. There's no access to counsel. And I think while litigation about individual processing centers is fantastic because it is really important to stop these horrible conditions, we need something broader because it's like a game of whack-a-mole for us litigators. Is they close Broadview and they will just open another place where folks will be held. We've seen it in New York also where people, they closed 26 Federal Plaza. Now there's people out in Long Island. It's happening everywhere, and that game of whack-a-mole is not feasible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I yield back.
Thank you so much, Mr. Garcia. I now recognize Ms. Escobar from Texas.
Thank you, Ranking Member Jayapal, for holding this hearing. It has been incredibly frustrating to be able to access information and conduct oversight, and so this shadow hearing is critically important. Thank you to all of our witnesses. Ms. Pierre, your testimony was especially moving, but we're all very grateful to each and every one of you for being here and for helping us shed light on what is happening in this administration. I represent El Paso, Texas, and El Paso is unfortunately the site of America's largest immigration detention facility. It's known as Camp East Montana, and it was funded by what Republicans call their One Big Beautiful Bill, which allocated $45 billion for immigration detention alone. Camp East Montana in El Paso is a $1.24 billion facility. Over $1 billion to hold thousands of people. I have conducted 3 oversight visits, and it's been really challenging to get in. As a member of Congress, I should be able to have unannounced visits, and Ms. St. John, I'll be asking you about that in just a moment. But the 3 oversight visits that I've conducted, twice I've been able to talk to a handful of detainees. The first group of detainees that I spoke to were adult men. Many of them had been in our country for 30 or 40 years. They had never committed a crime. Not only did they tell me that, but the color of their uniform told me that. Last week when I was there, I spoke to a group of women who showed me hives on their bodies because of how unhygienic the situation is. During each one of my oversight visits, I hear about rotten food. I hear about the inability to access not just legal services, but to get to their court hearings. I have heard about the fact that while we are paying a contractor to clean daily, because this is a privately run facility, the facility is only getting paid once a week. Detainees are having to wash their own clothes because the subcontractor we're paying for laundry is not doing it, not performing this function. So for Americans who are watching who may not feel moved by the inhumanity of this situation, I certainly hope they are moved by the fact that we have a private contractor pocketing American tax dollars instead of delivering the services that they are contracted to do. So we have contractors monetizing this situation, profiting off this situation, while the American government is providing little to no accountability and limiting congressional oversight. Ms. St. John, during one of my visits, actually each one of my visits, I'm told by detainees that the facility is cleaned up before I get there. And they said, we know someone is coming because suddenly they clean it up. Can you tell us about why it's so important for Congress to have the authority for unannounced visits?
Yes, absolutely. So that surprises me not at all that you've been told that it gets cleaned up. I know that in Arizona we have heard similar stories routinely with the new policy of not allowing unannounced visits. I know that recently our client said, oh, well, we know we're going to get good food next week because somebody's coming to visit. I've also heard clients say, well, the whole place smells like new paint. So it is a serious problem because, an unannounced visit allows members of Congress to see what's actually happening on any given day. Just like anybody else, if you know somebody's going to be coming in and checking in on you, you're on your best behavior. You made sure you cleaned up, the dirty dishes are away, and that's not the reality of what people are facing. When you walk into the medical unit and they knew you were coming, they make sure that their doctors are there. They make sure that they have the medications being provided. And that is not something that actually happens day to day routinely in our facilities. One of our facilities hasn't had a psychiatrist on staff physically present at the facility for over a year, to our knowledge. We have clients with severe mental health issues who have never seen an actual psychological professional in those facilities. And some of them are getting medication, some of them are not. So, again, this is why having the ability to do a visit with an unannounced visit is so critical. I would also add the ability to speak to people when you're there, because it's also a very different experience when you walk through and just see what's happening versus being able to talk to somebody about what their experience has actually been. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Escobar. I'd now like to recognize Ms. Dexter from Oregon.
Thank you so much, Ranking Member Jayapal, for convening this vital hearing, and to our witnesses for sharing your incredibly important insights with us today. We shine a bright light together on the cruelty and injustice that is being inflicted by Trump's immigration system. It is essential that we keep telling these stories and keep the pressure on. There's so much injustice happening right now, but pressure works, and justice can prevail. At our last shadow hearing, Mimi Letinich testified about her friend and my constituent, Jackie Merlos, who was detained with her 4 U.S. citizen children in a windowless cell for weeks and separated from them for months while she remained in ICE custody. I'm overjoyed to share that Jackie is now reunited with her family. But our work is far from over. Today, I share the story of another constituent. On the morning of September 16th, Rafael Areola Caballero was driving to work in the same car he uses to take his kids to soccer practice. He was suddenly surrounded by unmarked vehicles and masked federal agents who refused to show a warrant and laughed in his face when he tried to assert his rights. They smashed his window, cut through his seatbelt with a pocket knife, slicing him in the process, and dragged him out of his vehicle. Raphael told them that he was recovering from surgery. He still had the stitches in his elbow. He couldn't bend his arm, and they didn't care. They forced his arm behind his back and handcuffed him that way anyway, inflicting immense pain, swelling, and numbness. During his transfer to the Portland ICE facility and then to Tacoma, Raphael was denied the chance to call his family, denied medical care, denied dignity. When he finally saw a medical provider, he was told the pain didn't matter. He never received an exam or treatment, not once, not despite his repeated requests, not even after my office demanded it. As a physician, I am furious. This isn't just negligence. It's state-sanctioned harm. It is medical neglect enabled by a federal agency that has completely lost its moral compass. But Raphael's story is not just one of physical violence. It's a story about the collapse of due process. While in custody, Raphael told his attorney he feared persecution if deported to Mexico. Him and his attorney submitted a request for a reasonable fear interview multiple times, as is his legal right. My office flagged the request, and we informed ICE that his lawyer had faxed it to the facility. And yet, despite his medical injuries, despite his pleas for a reasonable fear interview, ICE deported Raphael. My team pressed ICE on why Raphael was not given an interview or a reasonable fear interview. ICE evaded the question. They claimed they had no record of the request. Only after we provided the certificate of receipt did they admit the truth. Their fax machine was out of paper. And when they finally added more paper, hundreds of faxes spilled out, hundreds of desperate pleas for help, hundreds of people being denied the most basic legal protections our laws promise. This is a grotesque failure of governance. It is cruelty cloaked in bureaucracy, and it is happening right now in our names. Let me be clear, no system that abandons medical care and disregards due process deserves our tax dollars. Our communities deserve better. And that's why we are here today, to shine a light on this inhumanity. I am grateful for Ms. Owings, an immigration attorney, to share her expertise with us today. And I'm looking at the clock and see I left us 20 seconds, so I will defer to the chair putting this on the record and maybe getting a response later. As an immigration attorney, can you speak to how unprecedented and dangerous it is for ICE to deny reasonable fear interviews in this way? And I'm sorry. Thank you.
Why don't you go ahead and answer as quickly as you can? We just need to get through all the members.
It is very, very dangerous. I would not say it's completely unprecedented, though. There's been lots of fax machines turned off, unplugged, out of paper over the years that I've been in this practice. The volume at which it is happening right now, however, that is unique in my experience.
Thank you so much, Ms. Dexter. Thank you, Ms. Owings. And I now recognize Mr. Tonko from New York.
Thank you, and I appreciate the ranking member, Jayapal, and the members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to join you here today. And thank you to the powerful testimony that's been offered by our witnesses. Over the past year, increased activity by ICE across the country, including in my own district in upstate New York in the Capital Region, has created a culture of fear amongst our communities. In fact, last night's news informed the general public that the latest apprehension was of 10 Afghans in the region, 2 of whom were men outside a local mosque just after morning prayer. Fear, and so that's the kind of fear that's being inflicted into the community. Fear that parents will be separated from their children. Fear that they will be detained because of their appearance. Fear that they will be mistreated and abused in detention. In my district, a mother and her 2-year-old daughter were separated in 2 different countries due to the cruel policies of this administration. It's stories like these that I have heard repeatedly from my constituents, many of whom are individuals who witnessed arrests or whose friends, neighbors, or family were taken and who are desperate for answers. In August, I was illegally denied entry at the Buffalo Federal Detention Facility in Batavia, New York, where several of my constituents are being held. With this unannounced visit, I was attempting to get some clarity on the status of detainees from my district, to speak with ICE and facility leadership, and to conduct general oversight of that facility. This visit was particularly important given a June report by ICE's Office of Inspector General, which found that the facility and ICE staff were not in compliance with standards related to the use of force, staff detainee communication, detainee grievances, medical unit staffing, as well as several other concerning findings. I was blocked at the door despite naming and detailing the law that grants me and all members of Congress access to these facilities. The facility individuals blocking my entry at the gate went so far as to confirm that they knew they were in violation of the law, yet I was still denied entry. So, Ms. St. John, I listened with interest to your exchange with Representative Escobar, and obviously, that cleaning up at the detention centers is something that we were suspecting was going on. Tell me, with the legislation, the law that informs us that we can make unannounced visits, do you believe the intent of that legislation was to provide that concept so that we could truly get an accurate assessment of the facility?
I mean, in short, absolutely yes. That is, the legislative intent, I think members of Congress probably know it better than I do, but the intent there is absolutely to be able to get a clear and accurate assessment of what's actually happening and not the cleaned up or gussied up version of what is happening in detention centers.
And as indicated in my remarks, the individuals indicated they knew they were in violation of the law. Do you think that is pretty much true across the board? Are members aware, are these officers aware or individuals aware that they should be letting us have a tour of the facility?
I certainly think that the people in charge of the detention facilities are aware of the law. I mean, individual guards may be more of a question, but I certainly think that the people who are making the choices about instructing those guards at the front desk who can come in and who can come out are very much aware of what the law says and what it is that they're doing instead. And I would go further to say that I think that problem exists across many levels of ICE, not just when it comes to congressional visits, but to any range of conduct by ICE right now that they know is contrary to law.
Thank you very much. I had other questions. I ran out of time, but Ms. Pierre, thank you for the powerful statement. I have a question for you. We'll get it to you in writing. Thank you so much, and I yield back.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tonko. I would just say that they absolutely know what they're doing, and they are trying to keep us from doing our authorized, obligatory duties as members of Congress. With that, let me recognize Ms. Garcia from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses today. And really, I thank you from the bottom of my heart, because it is, anytime we deal with this topic, I frankly just get depressed. I mean, the news are never good. Your description of everything that's happening to Rodney just almost brought me to tears. So I'm just grateful that you all are out there, on the ground, helping us with so many of these issues. Now, we've talked a lot about the detention, but most of the focus has been on adult detention. That I want to kind of bring the one that really does make me cry is what's happening to our children. And I know that in Houston, I've dealt with two situations where children were apprehended. One was on it; the family was on the way to Texas Children's Hospital for some very specialized cancer care. They were American-born children, but they were together with the family deported. Another one was the recent one that the child was autistic and could not communicate his real name and his real status, so he was deemed to be an unaccompanied minor and ended up in detention. And the detention center is new to the Houston area, and of course, with my luck, all this happened during the shutdown, that they didn't even really acknowledge my request to go visit that detention center immediately, and I still have not gotten a response from them. So, Ms. St. John, is it really any better at the children's detention centers? Do we still have some run by faith-based communities, or have we gone into this for-profit, highway to the point where everybody else's contracts have been canceled, and it's all the for-profit groups?
So in Arizona, we work also with children who are detained in the Office of Refugee Resettlement custody, and I would say that the shelters is what they're called. They're called shelters instead of detention
Well,
centers.
I call them baby jails.
And they are shelters in name only. This is a lockdown facility. People are not free to leave. There may be fewer bars on the doors, and
But do they have medical services? Do they have, I mean, when you talk about no psychiatrists, I mean, the impact of the mental health of a child at that age to be detained is just horrific from everything I've read.
Correct. And so the biggest difference, so there are major gaps in services for children also. We, again, routinely have complaints from children about failure to provide necessary gender-affirming care, failure to provide different types of medical care,
But are they getting their
abuses.
3 hot meals? Are they getting a bed? Are they getting a doctor when they need the doctor?
They typically do get
Because
their
the
meals.
autistic child I mentioned ended up having to be taken for surgery.
Yeah.
And they actually allowed the mother to come to the hospital to see the child, but wouldn't release the child to the mother.
Right, and so yes, children get meals. Children, maybe not meals that they like, maybe not meals that are actually nutritious, but they get meals. Kids can see the doctor, but sometimes they can't. And so this is the difficulty, is that the care there is maybe slightly better than what we see in detention centers, but it's still completely inappropriate for
How
children.
many children are in custody in baby jails today?
I do not know that
Ms.
number.
Boyd, do you know, ma'am?
I'm sorry, I don't know that number.
Ms. Owens?
No, ma'am, I'm sorry. I also do not know that number.
You don't? Because I keep hearing that of all the children across the country that are in detention, that there's been less than a dozen released, last month, that they're just detaining and detaining, to use that as a trump card, for lack of a better word, against the parents, to tell them that unless they self-deport, they will not be reunited with a child that's somewhere else.
And that is
Are you all hearing
absolutely,
that?
yes, something that we have seen across the network of providers who work with
So
unaccompanied
children
children.
are being used as leverage to.
That's correct.
political
Children are
tools.
not being released from custody. There's been a number of changes to the policies about who can qualify as a sponsor, even when children have been redetained from sponsors that were previously approved and are still completely appropriate sponsors. They're not being re-released to those sponsors. And we are seeing sponsors be detained and deported. So there's this problem of
So
sponsors.
it's a new type of separation.
Ms. Garcia.
I
thank
know,
you.
it's just.
Yeah, I'm sorry, we have so many members. I'm
Well,
going to stay
I
tight
realize that, but
on
we just
timing.
need to remember that there are many, many children
Yeah.
in detention right now.
Thank you so much, Ms. Garcia. I now recognize the ranking member of the Rules Committee, Mr. McGovern.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. I'll keep this brief. The United States is a country of immigrants, and immigrants make us strong. And yet we have a president calling immigrants garbage. I mean, it's sickening. This administration has made a practice to unlawfully detain people, and they don't stop there. They have used this massive and broken detention system to deprive people of due process, cover up systemic failures, and disappear people altogether, and we're hearing about those cases. I mean, Kristi Noem defied a court order and deported 3 planes worth of individuals to El Salvador without due process, and it's believed that 30 of them are still being held at CCOT, a maximum security prison that's infamous for human rights abuses that occur there. No one knows for certain if these men are actually there, and no attorneys have been able to contact them because DHS won't disclose their names and locations. So detention is being used to hide people and deport them so quickly that their lawyers can't find them, and sometimes so quickly that they don't even have a chance to retain an attorney. So, Ms. St. John, as somebody who helps provide legal services to individuals in immigration detention, you are uniquely familiar with the extreme need that exists. So could you discuss how the dramatic increase in detention has impacted your organization's ability to adequately provide legal services, and what are the consequences of an individual in immigration detention not having access to proper legal services?
So in terms of the problem of transfers and people being disappeared, it is absolutely, it's a massive problem, that people are being moved more routinely and more regularly from facility to facility to facility in a way that is making it extremely difficult for people, their family, or a council to be able to track them. People take days to show up again in the various systems that we have to actually track people down. And one of the things that people might not know is that Actually, it takes days even for people inside detention to get access to the systems to be able to make outgoing phone calls if they don't already have money on their books. And so there's really no way for somebody also who's detained to be able to say, hey, this is where I am, and reach out to people proactively. The expansion of detention that has happened has been extremely problematic in terms of access to counsel and to due process, because most of the facilities that have opened in remote areas where there are very few legal services. And it's disturbing to see how few or how little thought has been given to access to counsel in these locations. We saw that at Alligator Alcatraz, where people were being turned away, attorneys were being turned away by armed guards when they went to go see their clients. And we see it in facilities that I work in every day that aren't new facilities, but we can't get a phone call with our client. I work with people who also are attorneys in the criminal defense system who come as pro bonos to immigration, and they are shocked by how difficult it is to reach your client in immigration custody. They say, I would never have this problem as in a criminal setting, which is very telling, because punitive detention conditions are actually unconstitutional, and here we have civil detention being actually much more punitive than criminal detention. Yeah. And I'm sorry, I forgot the last part of your question.
I think you've answered most of my question. Okay. I would just say we're supposed to be a nation of laws. People are entitled to due process, and I heard Ms. Pierre's testimony about her husband, which is really troubling. But I think it's important to make clear what this administration is doing is not enforcing laws. They are engaged in systemic human rights violations against individuals who are being mistreated. Some of them are being sent to places where they disappear. Some of them are dying in detention. And we need to shine a light on that, and we need to do much, much better. This administration needs to be held accountable, and I thank you all for your testimony. I yield back.
Thank you so much, Mr. McGovern. Next, I'd like to recognize Ms. Ballant from Vermont.
So I just want to start by saying I'm grateful to all of you for being here, most especially Ms. Pierre. Your testimony is absolutely, completely heartbreaking. I know I speak for all the members up here. We are so sorry that our government is treating your husband in this way. It's shameful. I want to share a story from my home state of Vermont, where we've seen our fellow Vermonters ripped away from their communities, including a second grader who was grabbed and detained with his mother over the Thanksgiving holiday. Earlier this year, I conducted an oversight visit to a Vermont correctional facility that ICE has contracted with to hold people who've been detained all over New England. And what I saw and heard was shameful and disturbing. ICE is shuffling people through the system so quickly that they cannot get legal support or essential medical care. They move so quickly that Vermonters who are in these correctional facilities are in the dark as to when ICE is going to show up. It's making it harder for them to connect detainees with legal counsel, making sure that they can't get, the humane treatment that they deserve. And during my visit, one of the facility's staff members, a Vermonter, came up to me and pulled me aside and said, "Let me tell you what's going on. People are being deprived of the medicine they need to stay alive. People with chronic conditions are going untreated. Detainees are being held in facilities inappropriate for their medical conditions and needs. ICE is overriding or ignoring medical holds or unfit to travel medical designations, and they are transporting people who are waiting for critical medical care. ICE is ignoring signs of trafficking and abuse, particularly among young women, and detainees' mental health is being ignored, which of course is completely in line with what we are hearing, which is this is about brutalizing people. This is about dehumanizing people. And I know that the majority of Americans, and the polls bear this out, they are not comfortable with the kind of dehumanizing, the kind of abysmal treatment that people are getting. They know it's making us as Americans less humane. So I appreciate all of the work that you're all doing out in the field. I would like to concentrate on you, Ms. Owings. I know that you spoke at the top about so many of the things that I spoke about as well. in the last minute here, I want you to just give voice to the clients that you are working with and what their experiences are as it relates to medical care they are not getting.
The experience they're having is, I mean, including Rodney, it's violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Rehab Act. These are violations of the law. The fact that someone says that they need glasses and it takes them 3 weeks to get them, or not at all, when they're being shoved, in front of them a bunch of documents to sign that they cannot read in any language, these sorts of experiences just break your spirit. It's designed to do that. I'm very worried about many people who are in custody right now about whether they're getting appropriate medication, when they're next going to get to see the doctor, what steps can be taken to fix it. Because the other problem is, in the past, I would have put in a complaint to CRCL. I would have put in a complaint to OIDO. I would have put in a complaint to all of these.
You would have a channel.
Places. There would be a channel so that there was some accountability. We have no accountability right now. It is absolutely leash off. This is what is happening, and it's going on every day, and it's just growing.
Ms. Owens, thank you so much. I just want to say, this is happening in our name. This is happening with our tax dollars. And I just have to stop every day and ask myself, my God, what has become of us in this country? I yield back.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ballant. Now let me recognize Ms. Williams from Georgia.
Thank you, Ranking Member Jayapal, for holding this shadow hearing on immigration detention. And thank you to the witnesses who've joined us to share your lived experiences. And I, Ms. Pierre, as a mama, as a wife, my heart breaks for you as a Georgian, because I am trying to figure out what can we do to fix this problem other than we need a new president. But I am Congresswoman Nikema Williams, and I represent Atlanta, the fighting 5th Congressional District, where we fight for the civil and human rights of all people. That includes immigrants and detainees. And I wrote a letter on October 9th to Secretary Noam demanding answers about the conditions of the Atlanta ICE field office and my oversight responsibilities as a member of Congress. Deplorable conditions at the Atlanta office mean that people being detained are forced to stay in cramped, unsafe, and unhygienic conditions. This field office is cramped into a basement, was not meant for long-term detainees, and it doesn't have beds, showers, or space for the detained to meet with counsel. Prior to a June memo, U.S. Customs and Immigration Services guidelines said that people shouldn't even be held there for longer than 12 hours. Well, there was a memo that came out in June that changed all of that. But even prior to that, in the first 6 months of the Trump administration, over 1,200 people were forced to stay at least 24 hours in these poor conditions. More than 300 people were detained in the field office between 3 and 5 days. More than a dozen people spent over a week there, with 4 spending over a month at this holding facility. And according to the AJC, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, an immigration attorney said that her client, who is a nursing mother, spent 9 days sleeping on the floor at this Atlanta field office in a holding room. 9 days. It's unconscionable that immigrants, human beings, in my community or any community across the country are forced to stay in such conditions. In my oversight letter, I asked a series of probing questions to get answers and to force this administration to improve conditions in this facility and follow existing regulations. In addition to information about this reported overcrowding, I'm seeking information about whether people being detained are being fed and offered medical care in a timely manner, whether they can speak freely with counsel, and the conditions of children, pregnant women, and seniors in detention. The Department of Homeland Security, to nobody's surprise, has not responded to these questions and has not even acknowledged my request to come and do a visit. Ms. Owens, as an immigration attorney practicing in Atlanta and my constituent, how do the conditions that I've described at the Atlanta field office, I know we've been talking about the Stewart Detention Center, but specifically this field office, how does what I describe comport with your clients' experiences that you've seen there?
Thank you, Congresswoman. That is exactly the location of the individual I first mentioned who slept for several days on the floor right next to a toilet with 16 other people in the room, including a minor. It's a small holding cell. This is not a place with beds. This is not a place with showers. This is not a place with a telephone to even contact an attorney. And I understand they're trying to keep this off the books and off site, and they do not want you guys to go and see this. And that must change. That simply must change, because a lot is happening in the dark. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ms. Boyd, what particular quality metrics should members of Congress who are concerned about facility conditions in their district seek to get to the bottom of conditions in these facilities? What should we be doing? And I know we're out of time, and I want everybody to get their questions answered, so I'm going to follow up with you, because this is too important for us to not dig deeper into. Thank you so much, Ranking Member.
Thank you so much, Ms. Williams. Now I recognize Ms. Grijalva from Arizona.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here, and thank you, Representative Ranking Member Jayapal, for creating this space for us to have this conversation. Obviously, you see with the number of members of Congress that are here, it's a really critical issue throughout the nation, and it's heartbreaking, illegal, and inhumane the way our immigrant community is being treated. We have to remember that immigrants come to this country because there is a demand for people to be here, and the economy that the U.S. is built on literally is on the backs of immigrants. And many of us are first generation, second generation immigrants to this country, and many of the representatives that are here right now reflect this community that is screaming for us to be able to do something to rein in this administration. I represent Southern Arizona, Arizona CD7, with 3 ports of entry with Mexico, a lot of very rural communities at the Honotam Nation. So we have a lot of diverse needs, and the impact of ICE in our communities is being felt in ways that we never had before. And I remember very clearly the Florence Project, because as a Pima County supervisor, we supported the Florence Project and the incredible work that you do. And so this question, because I have limited time, but this question is going to be directed to May St. John. Your organization is the primary provider for free legal services and social services for thousands of people held in immigration detention in Arizona. We have recently seen troubling reports. We've been hearing them. We've been witnessing them, including Border Patrol's warrantless entry into a humanitarian aid station in Arivaca in southern Arizona just last week, and the continued interference with attorney access and congressional oversight. From your frontline work, how is Trump's administration's escalation of this warrantless operations and restrictions on attorney access affected people's ability to receive due process?
So, as I said in my statement, it is hopelessness by design. And that's actually, I think, one of the biggest impacts that I have seen at the Florence Project. Again, we have a project that works with people who have already been deported and are in Mexico. And the stories I am hearing from people of folks who had lives in the United States, 30, 40 years in the United States, families in the United States, work in the United States, no criminal history. And they just didn't even try to fight their case because the detention conditions are so horrific, and because the pressure they were facing from ICE officers was so great. That, I think, is actually one of my biggest concerns, because it completely cuts out people's ability to do what is promised under law. And it is happening, most of it's happening before somebody even has a chance to talk to a lawyer, again, in these short-term facilities. And also even in the long-term facilities, our access to counsel rights have been dramatically cut. I mentioned the legal orientation program, which is a program that has existed with bipartisan congressional support since 2003, was abruptly terminated earlier this year. And attorneys are not just counsel, they are the eyes and ears of what's happening in these facilities, and it's very purposeful trying to get the eyes and ears out of these facilities.
Thank you. And I do think that when we look at Arizona's cases, it reveals a broader pattern of abuses inside all of the detention facilities. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you so much, Ms. Grijalva. I now recognize Ms. Chu from California.
Ms. St. John, since January 25th, individuals have died in ICE custody on the Trump administration's watch. And this year, 25 have died, and we still have 1 month more to go. This is the highest number of deaths per year that we have had on record in the past 2 decades. 2 of those deaths occurred at the Adelanto ICE Processing Center in San Bernardino, California, which is run by the private for-profit prison company, GEO, and is amongst the most troubled and dangerous ICE facilities in the country. One of those cases was Ismael Ayala Uribe, a 39-year-old California resident who had lived in the United States since he was 4 years old and was a DACA recipient. After being arrested, he fell gravely ill at Adelanto, and his desperate pleas for help were ignored. Instead of receiving basic, timely medical treatment, Ismael experienced delays in care that ultimately cost him his life as he awaited the surgery that could have saved him. Another death was Gabriel Garcia Aviles, a 56-year-old father and grandfather who had lived in the United States for 3 decades. After a brief period in Adelanto custody, he was transferred to a local medical facility due to suspected alcohol withdrawal syndromes. Gabriel's family desperately tried to get more information on his whereabouts and condition, but Adelanto's staff repeatedly failed to answer or return their calls. When they finally received any answer on Gabriel, it was to be told to come and say their final goodbyes. Gabriel was declared dead in October, and a coroner told his family that she would not be conducting an autopsy and that they would declare his death due to natural causes. These cases are proof that Adelanto's long track record of inadequate medical care and preventable deaths is getting worse and worse. And that's why I have demanded accountability and transparency from ICE on these deaths and the increasingly dangerous conditions inside these facilities, especially as the administration does everything that it can to stop members of Congress like myself from entering the facilities to conduct our legal oversight. And that's also why I continue to call for Adelanto's immediate closure. So, Ms. St. John, what do the circumstances surrounding Ismael's and Gabriel's death tell us about the systematic failures in this administration's ICE facilities and their ability to care for and communicate with families and people in their custody? And based on what you see on the ground, do you expect preventable deaths in ICE custody to keep rising?
Unfortunately, the situation that you described with both Ismael and Gabriel's death in custody sound entirely familiar. With deaths in custody in Arizona, we also have seen similar patterns of refusal to take people for specialized care that was necessary, things like surgeries, misdiagnosis, or failure to do a proper differential diagnosis of alternative reasons that people might be suffering their pain. It sounds like that might be some of what was going on with the alcohol withdrawal syndrome. And generally, a lack of care towards people who have serious medical conditions. In Arizona, we had a gentleman pass away earlier this year who had completely untreated HIV, and I think something in the range of 8 opportunistic infections that ultimately took his life. So it's completely what we would expect, unfortunately. And I will say that in terms of the lack of communication with families, also that is completely standard. And it also is to counsel. When our clients get taken to the hospital, we have no contact with them.
Thank you so much, Ms. Chu. Now let me recognize Ms. Ansari from Arizona.
Thank you so much, Ranking Member Jayapal. Thank you, Ms. St. John, for being here. The work that you and your team do at the Florence Immigration Project is invaluable, and you have been such an incredible resource to my office as we've navigated these atrocities this year. As you know, I visited the Eloy Detention Center 3 times, and this is a center owned and operated by Core Civic. The conditions that I have seen have been horrific. I've had the opportunity to speak with dozens of women inside the facility now about everything that you described: lack of water, lack of medical care, racist, inhumane treatment, abuse, the rest. So I want to focus on those conditions. You talked about how awful the conditions are. Can you talk a little bit more about how they have worsened under the Trump administration?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the biggest differences, again, under the Trump administration are, there's two things. First, I think it is the lack of care in the sense of, or the knowing that there is no oversight. There's really, I think, Ms. Owings said, the leash is off. For people who want to behave badly, that is absolutely what they can and will do at this point. And again, we have seen a disturbing rise in complaints around abuses, both verbal and physical abuses. And there is no place to make our complaints anymore. Again, CRCL and OIDO, the Office of ICE and Ombudsman, sorry, I'm stumbling on that one, Detention Office Ombudsman, but those offices used to be a resource where we could at least document what was happening, and officers could potentially come in, or employees could potentially come in and try to rectify the situation. Now people feel that making a complaint is screaming into the void. There's absolutely nobody who is willing or interested in helping, which again leads to that, as I said, purposeful sense of hopelessness.
Thank you. You've also represented clients whose medical needs were either neglected or outright denied. I have been so appalled by what I've experienced with the advocacy for Yadi, who is the woman with leukemia at Eloy. She, has lost 70 pounds while being there. This last visit, I actually saw her vomit blood, which is something she's been describing. And the most infuriating part was the experience I had with the staff. The staff member saying, she needs to fill out this form in order to get her medical records after months of waiting to get an oncology appointment, which literally would not have happened had we not advocated publicly for it for many months. And Yadi, had told me she had filled this form out 3 weeks ago, and just the day prior as well, and the woman's like, I haven't seen the form. And I literally sat there for 2 hours basically doing direct patient advocacy. That's one of, I'm sure, countless stories. Can you explain how medical requests are handled at Eloy and how these kind of intentional bureaucratic processes are designed? I loved what you said about purposeful hopelessness. That's exactly the feeling that I got with her.
Absolutely, and thank you for doing that, by the way. Walking people through that process is not always easy. In theory, you can fill out a form and request medical care. The reality is that you fill out the form, it gets ignored. 3, 4, 5 days later, you fill out another form, still nothing happens. And that process just continues. And people really do start to wonder whether they're just getting thrown in the trash. I've had clients ask me that question. An additional thing that we have seen recently is, I'd never seen this before. I've been practicing in the Eloy and Florence detention facilities for almost 15 years, and we had a gentleman who has deteriorating cirrhosis of the liver, who was informed that his specialist care visits had been denied, and he had a note in his medical records saying ER treatment only.
Ms. St. John, I'm so sorry. Votes have been called. We're going to try to get through as many members as possible. Members, if you're willing to shorten your 4 minutes to 3 minutes, that would be great. And we're going to go to Ms. Hoyle from Oregon next.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. In my district, like many other places, we've seen increased ICE activity with people, even with legal status, being picked up and detained and moved out very quickly from the detention center in our area up to Tacoma before they can get access to legal help. Now, ICE is saying they're picking up criminals, but they are not. They're picking up people caught in a broken immigration system that is purposely broken by Republicans who want to wage war on immigrants. So I represent Newport, Oregon. So it's a community of just over 10,000 people. We rely on hospitality and fishing. We are right ahead of the Dungeness crab season, which is the most dangerous job in the United States. And off the coast, after an hour in the water, whether you have a life preserver or not, it is a body recovery and not a rescue. They moved our rescue helicopter, directed by DHS, 40 minutes south, right before Dungeness crab season, which will result in deaths of our fishermen. We have a fish processing center. We have hotels. We have elder care that have help wanted because our immigrants are afraid to go to work. Now, we can't get answers on this helicopter, but in 2 community meetings, 10% of Newport showed up. And this is everyone from immigration activists to the fishermen's wives, from Republicans to Democrats, to say no. They are trying to rent 200 hotel rooms, which would kill our tourism industry. The fact of the matter is Newport's saying no, and we know there'll be retaliation. What I would like to ask Ms. Voigt, for many of you, is, one, what tools do we have to fight back? I mean, you don't want to mess with fishermen's wives, I'm just telling you. And we are protecting our community members and our immigrants who cannot stand up. But what tools do we have to hold the administration accountable for this egregious behavior, and what have you seen work in other communities?
Yeah, thank you. I think congressional oversight is more key now than ever, especially in the detention context. ICE is operating in a black box, and even though sometimes, you all are getting refused entry, it can feel futile. Sometimes you are getting into those facilities, and either way, you are bringing attention to the fact that there is no transparency with this agency. Overall, I would say also empowering your constituents, making sure they know their rights in these situations, making sure they know what they can do to push back is vitally important.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hoyle. Now I recognize Mr. Menendez from New Jersey.
Thank you, Ranking Member Jayapal. In the Ranking Member's opening statement, she mentioned an arrest of one of our colleagues, LaMonica McIver. I was there that day with our other colleague, Congressman Watson Coleman, at Delaney Hall, a newly opened detention center in Newark, New Jersey, one of the most diverse cities in the entire country. And what we saw that day was very early on in this administration that ICE and DHS were going to operate without any weight of restriction or without abidance by standards and law, because they took 20 armed guards to go arrest the mayor of Newark, and what happened after that was an assault on 2 female members of Congress. So if that was happening outside with cameras to members of Congress, what's happening inside every single detention center across the country? That is what the American people should be asking themselves. That is why we have demanded our oversight abilities be reinstated. Because, Ms. Pierre, how, as difficult of a situation is, does it not provide you some level of comfort knowing that your member of Congress at any time that they want can go into that facility and visit your husband?
I think one of the Congress members mentioned it was, or maybe all of you all, it was very difficult to get a visit to see people like Rodney. I remember Senator Warnock's office. Some of his folks tried to go see Rodney, and they were successful. However, the staff was very strategic. They made sure his visit was only 3 minutes. There was a guard there. He couldn't speak. He couldn't show them his prosthetics. They're very strategic to make sure it's very difficult. But it is frustrating that our elected officials are not available to see constituents like Rodney, and it's very hard on families like mine. You guys are the voices for us. You guys speak up, you guys stand up for us. But then when you guys can't actually visually see and go into these places, it makes me wonder, like, oh my God, what America is this?
What kind of country is this, that representatives can't go see their constituents? They can't be the eyes and ears of what's happening in all these privately run detention centers. Mr. Voigt, in your 20-plus years of doing immigration law, have you ever seen such a deep infringement on the ability of counsel and family members to visit detained individuals?
No, this feels truly unprecedented, especially with the scale of detention right now.
Not just unprecedented, but in your years of doing this, could you have even imagined that this would be the situation we would find ourselves in 2025?
No, in fact, almost on a daily basis, I'm like, this must be the last worst thing that can happen or that can be done, and every day I'm surprised by a new atrocity.
I appreciate all of your advocacy. I appreciate the ranking member for her years of leadership on this issue. We will continue the work. We will be advocates for all of you, and with that, I yield back.
Excellent questions. Thank you so much, Mr. Menendez. Ms. Ross from North Carolina.
Yeah, thank you very much to all the witnesses. I especially want to thank the ranking member. We are both on the Immigration Subcommittee of Judiciary. 0 hearings on these kinds of things. We are simply derelict in our duty, and the ranking member has brought these issues to light in a way that Congress should be acting. Last month, a woman from my district, Fatima Velasquez Antonio, was detained by CBP while working at an HVAC job site. She came to the country as a teenager and has a pending asylum claim. This has been all over the news. And CPB has come and done these major sweeps in North Carolina, which I know Ms. Owings has talked about. She was denied the chance to post bond and be released to her family because the Trump administration has forbidden immigration judges from granting bond, even when there's no criminal history. Immigration judges used to be able to choose to grant bond to immigrants with ongoing cases if they were not a danger or a flight risk. Just to let you know, Fatima has purchased a home, so I don't think she's a flight risk. Thankfully, last week, a federal district court overturned the Trump administration's policy creating a class action, nationwide class action, but Fatima was still denied bond a second time. Now, we know that the denial of bond is one of the reasons that we have more people in detention right now who should not be there at all and who are suffering these conditions. I'd like to ask Ms. Owings, and then if there's a couple seconds at the end, Ms. St. John, can you discuss the Trump administration's policy of cutting off the eligibility for bond and how that is truly exacerbating this situation?
Yes, thank you so much for your question. It's very timely. I'm aware of the court decision last week that apparently there's a class action, and the government has done what they have done in several other cases lately, which is since ICE gets to write the rule book, they just decided to ignore that decision. So in a lot of cases, they're saying that that class is not certified, they don't believe it, and they are continuing to hold people without bond. This is all intentional. This is because detention is big business, and they have now the agreement from the bill this summer that says that they can have up to, over 100,000 beds, right? But they have to fill those beds. And since there are not people who are out violating, criminal laws and coming into contact with the immigration system in that manner, they have to find other ways to fill those beds and keep them full. And that is why they are denying bond. That's why they are saying this entire class of individuals who are present in the United States without status are ineligible for that consideration despite having homes, despite having residency requests in process. All of these things are being denied. And yes, it is systemic, and it is causing a lot of harm. It's also responsible for the overcrowding that we're seeing at this time. So it's essentially a problem that they have created in order to provide a monetary solution.
Thank you so much. Ms. Stansberry from New Mexico.
Thank you, Madam Ranking Member. And I just want to say thank you to all of our witnesses for coming here today. Ms. Pierre, I truly cannot imagine what you and your family are going through, and being willing to come and tell your husband's story is really just so meaningful to us. So thank you for that. I want to just start out this morning by saying we need to shut this down now. Period. End of story. Profiting by private prisons on human suffering is un-American, It is undemocratic, and it is morally bankrupt and wrong, and we are here to fight to shut it down. No private corporation should be making profits off of the suffering and the backs of our people, period. And that is why myself and Representative Jayapal and many of the people on this panel have been advocating even long before this current administration to shut it down, because this never should have started in the first place. And the massive expansion that we've seen during the Trump administration is a violation of human rights, of the civil liberties of Americans, and of immigrants who are lawfully seeking asylum in this country, and it is wrong. Now, I just want to take a moment, because I know we have folks who are tuning in from across the country, to say to all of our immigrant brothers and sisters out there that you have rights, and you have a right to seek asylum in this country. And the most important thing you can do right now is to make sure that you are connected with the lawyers and the advocacy organizations to make sure that your rights are protected. But we want you to know that you are welcome, you are loved, and we are going to fight like hell to make sure that you're protected, even in spite of all of the evil things that are happening in this country right now. Now, I am very short on time, but let me just say this. We have a private for-profit prison in my district that is being run by one of the two largest corporations that are profiting off of the suffering of Americans and the immigrants coming to this country, and we are going to shut you down. Let me just say that. Whether we do it federally, whether it happens through state law, or because our local communities, who, yes, are taking jobs in that facility because they themselves don't have other opportunities, do not want you there. We do not want this in our communities. We do not want our people to be suffering in our communities so that a corporation can profit off of us. So let me just say to you, Madam Ranking Member, thank you for bringing this into the light, because it is very clear that what the Trump administration wants is for our communities to live in the shadows. And we need to make sure that people understand what is actually happening. These are not criminals. They should not be in prison. These are people who came to the United States seeking a better life, who are lawfully seeking asylum, and a private prison is profiting off of their suffering, and we will not stand for it. So I thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you so much, Ms. Stansberry. Now let me recognize the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, Ms. Clark from New York.
Thank you very much, Madam Ranking Member Jayapal, and thank you to all of our witnesses who have come and shed light on a very dark period of time in our nation's history. We are examining a detention system that has become deadly, unregulated, increasingly hostile to the most vulnerable, especially Black immigrants, who are detained at disproportionate rates and face harsher treatment once inside. As chair of the Congressional Black Caucus and as a daughter of Jamaican immigrants, I must amplify Black immigrants, particularly from the Caribbean and Africa, and who face disproportionate detention and face harsher outcomes. Cases like Mr. Rodney Taylor's, a double amputee from Liberia, are not anomalies, rather reflect a broader and deeper troubling pattern. This year is the deadliest year in ICE custody in decades, with at least 20 deaths at detention numbers surge, and former officials warn these deaths reflect medical neglect, staffing shortages, and rapid arrests under dismantled oversight. At facilities like Adelanto, people, including those with disabilities, report being treated like dogs in cages, denied medication, food, clean water, and basic hygiene. Some go days without medical care. Pregnant women have been shackled during miscarriage, solitary confinement, denial of prenatal care, and medical procedures performed without consent. Meanwhile, private prison corporations that donated millions of dollars to Donald Trump are experiencing a financial windfall. I don't think that's any coincidence. Equally alarming is the systemic dismantling of oversight, with both the Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties and the Immigration Detention Ombudsman being eliminated. The erosion of accountability is not just dangerous, it is unlawful. Ms. Pierre, I want to thank you for your courage, your bravery, and your tenacity in seeking justice and freedom for your beloved husband. Ms. Voigt, pregnant women from Haiti, Jamaica, West Africa are among those reporting shackling during miscarriage and denial of prenatal care. What are we seeing specifically with pregnant Black immigrants in detention?
Yeah, I think being incarcerated itself is stressful. Being separated from family members is stressful. Being separated from other young children is stressful. All of that intense stress has particularly negative health effects on pregnant and postpartum women in detention. We see the medical neglect, we see shackling, we see solitary confinement, delayed medications, delayed prenatal care. All of these are issues that CRCL has looked at in the past and that ACLU is shining a light on right now.
Very well. Let me thank you. I'm going to yield back. I have further questions that will be submitted for the record. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Clark. We're going to try to get through our last two members, Ms. Tlaib and then Mr. Ivey.
So I'm here just to share a story and to understand, as a child of immigrants and immigration attorney myself, the dehumanization of our immigrant neighbors has been happening for years, and we just saw the president yesterday go after our Somali community. And, they've become, where our constituents and their loved ones are disposed of. That's what I feel like. They're moved far away from their families and robbed of precious, precious moments. This is Mohan. I'm so getting emotional about this. This is his daughter. Mohan is a Nepali-speaking Bhutanese refugee who is part of an ethnic minority that was resettled in the United States under the Bhutanese, settlement program. He was born in a refugee camp. This is the daughter of a refugee. After his family was expelled, as you know, in Bhutan due to their ethnicity, he is stateless. And he's not recognized as a citizen by anywhere, and they want to send him there. We don't know what's going to happen to him there. And all I didn't even ask for anything but, can he at least hold his daughter before you put him on a plane to who knows where? They won't even share our travel document with us. This is what's happening with our money, with our tax dollar money, with no oversight. Ms. Pierre is many people with their loved ones there. They can't touch them. He can't even just put her in his arms. And do you know what I get? Well, he's causing a lot of trouble. What is that? Because he asked for his glasses? He was asking for his wedding ring. He needed that connection. And do you know, Chairwoman, he just asked, he doesn't speak English very well, and he asked for a translator. And they got angry with him. Well, we'll let him do it through video. That's not the same thing. Imagine being in his spot. And I think it's really important when we do these shadow hearings that we share these stories, because we have to understand what behind everything that is happening, there are real people. With that, Madam Chair, I yield. I just cannot thank you enough for this opportunity. Her name is Brianna, and this is her mother, Tika. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Tlaib. I'm going to yield to Mr. Ivey. I know they're just about to close vote, so go for it.
Yeah, I want to thank you for holding these hearings. These are very powerful, very informative. I want to thank the witnesses, Ms. Pierre, you in particular, for coming and bringing your testimony today. My district, Kilmar Abrego Garcia used to live in my district before he was essentially kidnapped by the Trump administration and deported to El Salvador, which is the one country in the world that the court said that he should not be sent to. And he's gone through an odyssey that would make Kafka blush ever since. They said they couldn't bring him back, and even though the Supreme Court had basically said you need to bring him back so he can have his due process, they brought him back under the pretense of having charged him with criminal offenses that seemed to be falling apart in Tennessee. But the one piece that I would ask, and we don't actually have time to give you a chance to answer, I'll have to follow up, but they were going to send him to various countries. They keep picking various different countries to send him to, even though he hasn't been convicted of a crime in the United States, in El Salvador, or any place else in the world. And there's no explanation about what kind of sentence or what amount of time he would have to spend in one of these jails, many of which are just flat-out hellholes. I went to try and visit him in El Salvador, it is frightening down there what's going on in those prisons. So they wouldn't let me in there. Believe it or not, when we tried to visit him here in Baltimore City, I went with 2 senators and several other members of Congress. They wouldn't let any of us in. So we didn't have a chance to even see him there. So I thank you for the work that you do, Madam Chair. I thank you for what you're doing. I want to find out your sense of, I can't do it now, but afterwards we'll have to go vote and come back. But let's keep up this fight. There are thousands of people, and sadly a growing number, who are facing this kind of uncertainty, to say the least, about where they may be sent or how long they might have to stay or whether they might have to die where they're sent to. We have to keep fighting, and I thank you for fighting on the front lines. We'll be fighting with you. Thanks so much, and keep up the great work.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ivey. They've called votes. I didn't get to ask my 5 questions because I felt like my 5 minutes because I felt like it was more important for members to get theirs in. But I do want to say to you as we close this hearing that we are not giving up on this. I have been working on this issue for 20 years, and we put the structure in place that allowed this expansion to happen, and then we allowed the expansion to happen. And we even passed laws on the floor of the House that made it worse, that took away any need for conviction in order for somebody to be deported. And everything that this administration is doing is trying to keep it in the shadows, keeping members of Congress out, sending people to third countries, doing all of the things that they are doing because they hope that people will not pay attention. But here's the thing. People are paying attention. Across the country, people are seeing this, and the fact that we had, I don't know how many members we had today show up, 26 members or something show up, is testament to the fact that in people's districts, you heard every story here. Members wanted to tell the stories of their constituents because this is what we're trying to deal with. And I just want to say how grateful I am to you all for being here, for being on the ground, whether it's advocating for your own family member, your own husband. And we're going to do another, I know there have been letters about your husband, Ms. Pierre, but we're going to do another one because it's just outrageous. And the only tools we have are shadow hearings, because the majority won't call a hearing, so we have to do these shadow hearings, and the ability to hear from you what's happening on the ground and to tell those stories. So I want to really thank you for your dedication, for your commitment, for the work you're doing, for the advocacy you're doing. The trauma is real, Ms. Pierre, I know it is, even if you have to move out of it into being an advocate for your husband. I know that it takes a huge toll. So I am just so deeply grateful to you and to all of you for being here. Thank you so much, and this hearing is